different topic video every couple of weeks where we have the opportunity to explore some of the bigger concepts with regards to mental well-being. Today, of course, we're looking at a pretty big one.
Depression.
It is depression that we're going to be looking at. But before we get into that, I think it's always nice if we just do a little bit of a staff introduction. So, I'm Charlie.
And I'm Jazz.
Very good. And we are wellbeing coaches of Isopia.
Yeah, and I come from being a member at Isopia through to becoming a staff member and learning and adapting those skills for myself. I think it's really good to have this space to talk about our content and what we're doing, and involving you all into this process as well.
Absolutely, and similarly to Jazz as well. I haven't come through Isopia as a member myself, rather I've been here from the start as well, but I also have this wealth of lived experience, and that is in particular what it is that we're going to be sharing with you guys today. So, on that note, I think it is worth us saying off the bat, we are not academically trained, and we are not medical professionals. What we are is two people with a wealth of lived experience and knowledge around the topic, around falling into the hole of depression in this case.
Yeah.
Having a lot of experiences there, but also a lot of experiences in the things that we can all start to learn and apply in order to get ourselves out of that hole.
And I think it's really important before we do start this session, got a bit of a cough there. Just to start this session, we are in the public domain. So for any members who are currently accessing our services and engaging with our lives on our private members area, please be aware that this is a public live. So your comments, we of course would like your comments if you're comfortable, but please be aware that this is public. So any comments you put on this can be seen by the general public. We obviously would love you to engage with our content, and would love you to get involved and ask any questions that you have for us today. But it's really good to respect that people have boundaries around this and they don't want to talk about it in public, and that's okay too. So feel free to do either or either, and we will be more than willing to answer any questions or take any feedback from the questions that we answer as well.
That's absolutely, I think, specifically what it is that we're aiming to do today is just to create this hour space where people that might be coming up against adversity, or have friends or family that might be experiencing some struggles themselves, have an opportunity to ask some really important questions and just have a space in which we can start to explore some ideas around it. And really the aim of this session is to start to give you guys perhaps a little bit of insight into depression, and also I think hopefully we'll have an opportunity to touch on some of the things that we might be able to do in the first instance as well.
And also feel free to engage with each other on the Facebook as well, or on whichever social media that you're using. Talk to each other, discuss things with each other. We at Isopia, we all work around the importance of connecting with people and being in a connective space to talk about us as human beings, not as us as a disorder or a diagnosis or a mental health illness, whatever that might be. We're here as people who have adversity, as you said. We're here as people who want to learn and want to get some insight on this kind of subject. So it is really important. If you're willing, do get involved and have a chat with people and discuss. Let's talk about it.
As we've come to understand as well, community is a huge part of the process, and
Absolutely.
that's specifically what it is that we're offering today.
It's already good to say as well, we can't see your names, so if you're commenting, we're not going to read your names. Don't feel that's personal, we just can't see your replies. So if we reply to a feedback or a comment, we can't actually see who is writing those comments.
Absolutely, that's very worth mentioning as well. All right, without further ado, shall we delve into the topic and just reiterate any thoughts that you have, just let them come out, drop them in, and we'll tackle them as we go through. So the first question that we have today, I have had a little look, and I know that the first couple, Jazz, are quite personal.
Yes, let's have a look. I'm just going to, there we go.
What does depression mean to you? And I think that is a hugely expansive question for us to start with, because in my experience, people can find that they have very unique experiences of depression. But for me, there are a few things that I've noticed that lots of people share in common, and certainly that I identify with as well when I was in the midst of that depression just a few years ago. For me, depression is synonymous with lacking motivation. We're spending more of your time horizontal than vertical. I don't know if that was your experience as well. But finding that I spent much more of my day doing perhaps nothing, it seemed, to the outside world, rather than getting on with the bits that I felt I wanted to do. For me, the biggest thing that I noticed, though, with depression is that there is a sense of losing that light at the end of the tunnel. It might have been there for a while, we might have had it for a part of our lives, but when depression really starts to take grip, there is a lack of hope that can start to ensue, and then we can start to lose that ability, or that we start to lose hope for change, effectively.
Yeah.
We can see ourselves in effectively a catch-22 where everything that we seem to do might potentially feel fruitless.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, the way depression caught hold of me was that it really kind of emphasised the feeling that I wasn't able to achieve, wasn't able to move forward, I wasn't able to become a worthwhile person that I wanted to be. And it caught on to that, and at the same time it wouldn't let me disprove it. So I didn't feel like I could get up every day. I didn't feel like I had a place in the world. I felt like I was just kind of existing, and I had a very kind of warped view on what depression actually was as its concept, and because I thought that depression was this kind of incurable thing that only a certain very set amount of things could help me, I wasn't willing to put other work in on myself that might have been really helpful, because I wasn't understanding the benefit, especially things like core needs and like sleep, food and exercise, all these kind of things. It was something that really held me back from achieving and moving forward.
I think what I'm taking from that is that it really narrows our focus as well. Where once we might have seen lots of opportunity for change and different things we might be able to do to manage, we kind of get this sense of disconnection.
Yeah.
And where we might have seen so many different things we might be able to do in order to help ourselves, we can get so narrowly focused, I feel, as well, that we just again see nothing, perhaps, but the inevitability of lack of change and darkness. To be a little bit poetic with my language there.
I think that's definitely a really good. I think that's a really good kind of reflection on depression, low mood. Did you find with depression and low mood that there was a massive? When I was low, when I had a low mood, I would automatically kind of label it as depression, when actually it was a human emotion that I was struggling with and having, I was either grieving or I was having some issues, some kind of human emotion issues, things that we all have, that because I was so used to feeling low and feeling depressed, that I would just assume all of the low mood feeling was depression. And all of it was because of the same core thing, that I was defective, rather than my situation was different and had its own different ways of resolving.
You've hit on so many key points there, Jazz.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but that's the thing that I love most about this. Sometimes we're in the midst of depression, we can start to label ourselves and label our moods potentially on a day-to-day basis. But this proved to be a real good point of realization for me, is that underneath depression, and you said it yourself, there is a human emotion. What is that human emotion? It is sadness.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Sadness because of perceived failures of the past, perhaps. Sadness because of a struggle, perhaps, to see how it is that you might get connection and meaning from your day-to-day life. And
we're allowed to feel, I think it's about accepting that we're allowed to feel more than just the happy emotions that are the grand expectations of feeling happy and perfect all the time. We're allowed to feel sad. We're allowed to let things affect us. Somebody in the comments just said, really good point, Jazz. Often we don't allow ourselves to just feel sad. We're allowed to feel sad. It helps us process the information. It helps us process what's going on. It helps us to be able to, and from sadness comes motivation when you use it productively. If you're recognizing things are sad and things aren't right and you're struggling, negative emotion can often, if it's kind of productively processed, can move on to some really productive outcomes to your mental health. It takes a lot of work, and it doesn't happen like that all the time, and that's not the kind of expectation for every single event. But actually, there is some massive positives to any of the kind of the negative emotions. Not all of them, but most of them will have an element where they can be switched into something really positive.
That's it. I think this is something that's quite readily lost a lot of the time. It is part of the human experience for us to feel painful emotions. I don't even like necessarily the word negative, because even the painful emotions, the negative or bad emotions,
you're right. Yeah,
exist fundamentally to communicate to us that something needs to change.
That's a really good point. I think we get stuck on negative versus positive, when actually it's just the way we're perceiving that. Painful emotions and ones that are really productive, they can go part and parcel.
Exactly. And to take it back to depression in this case, for me it is contextualized as extreme sadness, and where a positive painful emotion might motivate us towards making those changes, sadness can feel so overwhelming at times that it acts as a bit of a block. And therein we have that narrowing of focus, and we might struggle to kind of see what it is that we might need to do and to motivate ourselves to make those necessary changes.
I think we have a really, I've just pinged on a really interesting comment here. Hello there, I'm in a great condition at the moment, but the memory of recent deep depression is still fresh. How can we build resilience to counteract life's inevitable hurdles? Thanks. That's a really good question.
That's a hugely good question. So, off the bat, I think something that is worth noting here is that, unfortunately, life doesn't slow down.
No.
It is constantly... Sorry, do you mind dragging it back to the question?
Sorry.
I like to refer to it. I don't want to lose track of what I'm saying.
There you go.
So, inevitably, life is going to throw us challenges. It does not slow down, and as much as sometimes we might try and protect ourselves from the vulnerability of the outside world, as we do see sometimes, the action tendencies that we might have with depression, inevitably other bits are going to come on. With regards to resilience, it's a tricky one, but for me, resilience is something that is carefully built up over time. It is something that, as we have different experiences, as we learn to navigate those experiences and we experience some sacrifice and suffering along that way, we start to build almost an internal wisdom, and resilience kind of comes along synonymously with that. I want to put a little disclaimer here. I am not suggesting that we need to go through the cycle of depression X many times before we feel properly equipped to deal with it, because there are plenty of other things that we can start to do to build a resilience around that.
And I think when resilience comes into it, it's not trying to avoid the feeling coming back again, is it? It's about actually, accepting these things happen, but be able to work on the tools that work for you, to be able to make that dip easier to get out of again, to get back to that level of feeling quote unquote stable. The really profound thing, the work that I did on myself when I was coming through the service and coming through my own journey, was accepting that I'm going to feel negative, I'm going to feel low, I'm going to feel these painful emotions at some point, at a different point in my life, because I'm a human, I'm allowed to. But the work isn't necessarily to work on stopping these emotions from happening.
Huge.
It's actually to get myself to a point where when I dip, I'm able to get myself and recognise it and get myself out of that dip quicker or more efficiently, or without even more effects to other areas of my life. It helps me to very productively get back to where I was, or at least to get back moving again, get back progressing, or to accept help when I need it.
That's another huge part of it. Jazz, you stole the words from my mouth.
I do that sometimes.
No, it's brilliant. It's the resilience and success in this instance isn't to be defined by shielding ourselves from low mood, because it will happen. It is going to happen. That is the one guarantee that I can give everybody. But success is, like you say, defined from managing those emotions as of when they come on, and quickly and efficiently taking ourselves back to a place of contentment. But this little bit of wisdom doesn't just stick with sadness as well. It is something that kind of pervades lots of different areas as well, so we can look at it with anger, guilt, shame, for instance. Anxiety comes into it as well. Any painful emotion and resilience to those emotions is developed by having the knowledge of how you can take yourself back to that place.
Absolutely.
Very good.
And I think, have we got it with the next question?
Yeah.
Should we go on to our next question?
Absolutely.
What are some of the directions you struggled with?
Right. Shall I kick us off for this one?
Absolutely, go for it.
So I know that when I was at my worst several years ago, again, I'd got to this place where I'd started to cut myself off from the outside world in a bid to protect myself and to shield myself from having to feel a lot of these painful emotions. And consequently, as I cut myself off, I started to lose confidence in my ability to do certain things. So for me, the first thing that comes to mind was maintaining friendships. I'm going to have to throw that one out there.
Yeah.
Because coupled with this depression, there was this kind of pervading sense of feeling broken, defective, unlovable, unworthy. And that created a lot of anxiety in me, socially. So I have, thankfully, a list of some really, really good friends. But at the time, I really struggled to maintain those friendships and to talk to them authentically because there was an underlying fear.
Yeah.
I think friends is the first one for me.
Friendships in general. It comes into the management, but also the way we approach it with the friends and the way the friends react to what's going on. And you have the people in your life. I have some incredibly close friends who have stuck by me through thick and thin. And I have friends that I've lost because I wasn't able to communicate why I was avoiding or why I was keeping myself in. And that's part of human experience. That's part of life, isn't it? But it's so managing friendships, managing socially, and managing communication and relationships with people in general is massively affected by low mood.
Exactly. Not like you just said, relationships in general. So not just friendships as well, but certainly intimate relationships was something I really struggled to get a grasp on for a long time. And I spent a good 6 years of my life deliberately avoiding any kind of romantic or intimate relationship. Because fundamentally, I had this belief that if I were to go out and to put myself into another relationship, they would come to discover the real me, who I wasn't very proud of or happy, and inevitably, in my own mind, that would lead to hurt.
Yeah, I think self-worth was one that really got me in my low mood. With my beliefs of myself would materialise from being beliefs that could be challenged to facts that were unchangeable. And it was so difficult when I was in my low points to really break out from that belief that actually I was worthy and I was capable. I was able to move forward in my life and I actually didn't have to conform as well. I felt that recovery and becoming happy, quote unquote happy, meant that I had to conform to somebody else's version of happiness. So I became extremely blinkered in the way I dealt with myself because I thought I have to be this way inclined. I have to treat life this way because this is how this happy person in my life has dealt with. And actually I needed to foster my own version of happiness and self-worth for myself.
That's one of the fundamental truths that we might come across through our journey through it. But this is a huge thing that you've touched on there as well. These beliefs that we can hold, they are fundamentally beliefs. We see them as fact. And it's sometimes the struggle can be in distinguishing between, like you say, what is a genuine fact and what is a really imprinted, ingrained version of a truth that we are telling ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's an important step in it. I have seen some cracking comments.
Yeah.
That top one there, depression to me is staying in my comfort zone and not wanting to deal with life. It's the sense of disconnection that comes. But I'm trying to set... Oh, I've just lost it. Apologies.
And hello to the person from YouTube who says it's not real time. We are in real time. We're just we're about 15 seconds behind usually. I think it is with these lives.
That's all right. We are real time. So in my comfort zone, I want to deal with life, but I'm trying to set myself a task daily to try to keep me going, even when I have a depressive episode, even though it's hard.
I think that touches on a really important thing about actioning. When we are in a low place, thank you for bringing that in. When we're in a low place, it can be really hard to motivate ourselves to do anything because we set expectations that the goals we need to be achieving are very specifically that they need to be in a certain way or in a certain order. If you just get up and say, I can't do this task that I have to do, but what I can do is this smaller task that's going to help. Count that and celebrate that the same way you would celebrate the big task that you wanted to achieve. Because any movement, any progression, taking little steps for yourself, a task daily to keep yourself going, and a task daily to help yourself maintain or whatever that is for you is so important and it's so good. It evidences to you as well that you are capable of doing these tasks.
That's true. This has just made me think of a TED talk that I saw not too long ago, and I can't remember who it was by, so I do apologise for that. But the gentleman proposed that the opposite of depression is vitality. And what he means by vitality is that ability to go out, to take those actions and to take those steps. And I think that this points us towards a deeper truth as well. Effectively, in order for us to start to learn to better manage our depression, it is going to require small steps and action. So just reading that comment there has filled me with a lot of joy, because you are absolutely on the right track.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Somebody on YouTube says, I've lost friends because I isolated myself. And I think it's really good to own that sometimes, and actually say the next step is always to say, I can work on getting them back if those are people I want to have in my life, or actually I can meet new people with my values and my things. And by saying, you know, recognizing the cause of why you've lost touch with people is the first step in either remedying it or rectifying it, or actually moving forward and moving on from it and saying, you know, this might not have worked, this situation, this relationship, this friendship might not have worked because we were two souls. I'm going to use an analogy, we were two souls who weren't just the timing was wrong. But actually, you can meet people, you can connect with people when you recognise that you haven't lost people because of you and your personality, you've lost it because of the situation. And then we can work on you can work on the situation and you can change the situation. And I think that's really, really important to bring in, and thank you for that person to bring that in.
I've just seen another comment from Facebook as well, which I absolutely love. Have you guys got any tips on how to, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, assuage the shame aspect of depression? So how is it that we can start to work on the shame aspect of depression? I love that this question has come in, because there is a gentleman called John Bradshaw who made a proposition, in fact, that underneath almost all mental health conditions, and specifically depression he was alluding to, there can be these shame-based beliefs. Beliefs of, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm broken, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable. Oh, see my hand went out of shot. And these can be the kind of things that might potentially limit us and cause that anxiety in taking steps. Shame is a huge, huge, huge topic, an absolutely gigantic topic. And I think this is something that we'll probably have more of an opportunity to look at in the confidence and self-esteem. Because if we have shame-based belief, quite often it will start to affect our self-esteem, the inner respect that we have for ourselves. But I would like to posit a couple of things that we can do. So here we are. If this is our level of self-respect at the minute, often what we'll find is that we carry this expectation, this is where we want to be getting to. Ideally, in the dream world, our expectations are going to match the reality of where it is that we want to be and how it is that we feel about ourselves. This leads us with two kind of possible directions. We can either work on increasing our self-esteem by taking actions, by challenging ourselves, by going out into the world and achieving the things that we want to do, so we can start to change that perspective if we have of ourselves. But this is another huge thing as well. We can work towards self-acceptance. And self-acceptance doesn't require us to change anything necessarily, but it works on bringing our expectations back in line with who it is that we already are. Recognizing our strengths, the qualities that we already do have, but also accepting the imperfections. Because in itself, what we would be asking to do by working towards self-acceptance would be to start to extend compassion to ourselves and start to love ourselves.
Absolutely.
And this is just a little thing to think on. If you think back to the people that perhaps you love, and I know this is certainly the case for me, they aren't perfect. Nobody is perfect.
No.
Absolutely nobody.
I think there's a real element of self-acceptance comes into this quite a lot, and the fact that what we need to do is manage our expectations when it comes to ourselves, forgive ourselves and say, do you know what, I might not be able to do all these things that I thought I was going to do when I was in my higher self, when I was feeling well, when I was feeling on top of the world, whatever that might be. But I can do these things that are really going to help me, and they are just as valid to do those than these big life expectations that I've set on myself. I think what helped me to progress even faster than I thought I ever would was letting go of the expectation that I had to do it a certain way, and I had to do it in line with the way that somebody else did it, or the speed at which somebody else achieved their milestones. I am my own person, and if I can only get up in the morning and make my bed or just wash up a couple of plates, if that's as much energy as I could assert to that day, I did my best, and that's okay.
That's a success.
Yes, it's a success.
And I suppose this leaves us with a dual way of managing. We can either learn to work on taking some steps to reconnect with the things that give us meaning in our life. And as we do that effectively, we need to learn to change our mindsets and to extend self-compassion, so that eventually we'll have this mindset that we're okay with who it is that we are, whether that's through personal growth or working towards accepting.
Absolutely. Shall we go on to our next question?
I think that could be a very good idea. Ooh. Sorry. Jazz?
I've got depression in my family. Is that why I'm depressed? Now this is a good question. I think this question is a fundamental question when we're talking about depression.
It's one that I hear coming up time and time again.
Absolutely.
So whenever I'm doing a workshop in-house, specifically around this topic, it's something that I like to ask people if they've got depression in their families. And I believe that you might do. Is that right, Jazz?
I do.
I've got a history of depression in my family. And often we can start to build up this idea that perhaps there's a genetic kind of cause for us feeling depressed. This is something that I want to say. Of course, genetics, biology, they do play a part in how it is that we feel. However, it is possibly a much smaller percentage than we might think of people who are truly biologically depressed. What is more likely is that we have started to role model the influential people in our lives when we were small growing up, and it could be that we are mimicking their way of living, mimicking the way that they might think as well, and mimicking the way that they relate to the world.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a very big question.
It is one of those, and it's, I think with any kind of there's a lot of there's a lot of learnt behaviours. There's a lot of also, in my experience, a lot of my kind of, especially my teenage years, when I started to become unwell in myself, I started to that became my friendship circle. So it isn't just parents and carers. It's not just when it comes to learned experience. It can be peers, it can be friends, it can be situations that you're in. If you spent time in hospital, these things can affect it. Actually saying to yourself, being around people who influence you in whatever way. School is a massive one. In school, if you've got a friendship group, or if you've got a group of people where you're used to doing, where everybody does it one way and that's the acceptable way. When I was younger, a lot of online stuff like Tumblr and these kind of blog sites where they really kind of promoted kind of the quirky or the kind of edgy way of being mentally ill, and they would promote that behaviour. Those were the kind of communities I found myself thriving in because I felt like I was accepted. So then I would, conform to that kind of that belief system. So family certainly could have an effect in it, and so can genetics can certainly have an effect in it in certain circumstances. But it is a really good question. It's a really good kind of it's a good question to ask.
It's a really good question. I love that what you're describing there is the way that we might start to assimilate almost with the people that we have around us. And I can't remember exactly who said this. I think it was John Ron, who might have said that at any moment in time you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And that is to say that naturally, as we spend time with people, we start to naturally mimic the way that they speak. Perhaps, I don't know if you've seen it before, maybe you spend time with someone with a different accent and you accidentally start to take it on a little bit, but that can start to have an influence. But more importantly, this I think would probably be a good time to talk about the possible routes that we can have into depression as well. And there is a model that I like to talk about, and a graphic that I believe that we have available, called the Bio Psychosocial Model, that helps to really well explain, we have it on screen now, the 3 different routes that anybody can take into struggling with depression, but not only that, just generally speaking, mental well-being. So on one aspect, we have biological reasons for potentially feeling depressed. That is relating to our hormones, our brain chemistry, age, genetics, and specifically what that is talking about is our physiology. The brain is a part of the human body, and of course some of the structurings and the way that the brain interacts as well can start to pose a bit of a reason for why we might feel low. But like I said, that is a much smaller percentage than we might potentially realise as well. The other route into depression is psychological. And psychological depression talks about when our own inner narrative, our poisoned parrot, our inner demon, or the way that we talk to ourselves and interpret the world
Yeah.
around us could potentially be a part. So this is our mind, it is our thinking, it is those beliefs that you were alluding to earlier as well, and it's where we start to put our focus and our meaning. And this is something that we often underestimate as well, but our thoughts play a huge, huge part in how we feel in any given moment. And often our thoughts can lead us to a happy place,
Yeah.
an angry place, or a sad place as well, depending
Absolutely.
on the interpretation that we have. And then finally, we have the sociological aspect as well that we can see on the graph there, and that talks about really circumstantial or environmental depression. So when outside influences might be playing a factor. So our relationships, our work-life balance, do we have connection to meaning and purpose? Do we have security? Are we secure on our finances and our housing? I don't know about you, Jazz, but let's just say you were to leave this live today, and this is absolutely not going to happen, just to be clear, but Maria were to tell you you're out of a job, you went home, you discovered you were evicted. Would it be fair for you to be sad, and sad for a while?
Absolutely, and I think this is the part of low mood and depression and any kind of painful emotions that we sense. We don't recognise the sociological impact, and we don't put importance on it. Sometimes, actually, these things that affect our day-to-day lives have a massive effect on our well-being. One of them that comes up again and again is routine. It's interesting how when we go into a lower place, the first thing that we tend to move away from is our day-to-day routines. We get out of touch with our social groups or our work or things like that. When actually routine is vital because it gives us that framework. And as you said, if I came home, if I got out of this live, lost my job, lost my house, I would be in an extremely low place, because the overwhelming stress of having to deal with that kind of stuff without the support would be enough to kind of, move me into that lower place. And I can assume that would be similar for yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good reflection, actually, but sometimes the way that we are living our life can also have a huge impact on our mood as well.
Absolutely.
And something that we like to talk about is core values. And a core value is a fundamental building block that each of us have, and they're all going to be unique, which dictates what we believe to be right and what we believe to be wrong.
I tell you what, being in touch with your core values and actually writing your core values down, you start to recognise not only how it links your emotions, like your low mood, but also how it kind of feeds into your life. It feeds into what you go on to move on to, or jobs you go for, groups you hang around with, and all your different emotions, from happiness and joy to anger and low mood. It's really good. It's a really good framework in which to have under your tool belt. And we always talk about writing things down, figuring out your core values. Core values are things like honesty, loyalty, whatever. They might be different for everybody. Kind of humour has always been one for me. Have those kind of core values. They are so important, just so that we know, and they're not wrong. Your core values aren't wrong. If someone else has a different core value, or if somebody doesn't agree with your core value, it doesn't mean that your core value is wrong. It just means it's different to somebody else's, and that's okay.
I think that's what fundamentally makes us so different. And you were talking about humour being one of yours.
Absolutely.
I like humour. I wouldn't say it's a core value of mine, but so just to share a little bit, I consider myself to be quite British, and I have a core value around taking turns, shall we say, politeness as well. And if I ever see anybody queue jump, it sends me to a place of rage.
Yeah.
That is a light way of putting it there. But this is the really important thing to do. When we start to recognise our core values, what it is that matters to us and makes our hearts sing, then what that starts to do is point us in the direction for the way that we should be aiming to build our routine, so we can incorporate a way of living that matches who we are the best possible way. And in essence, if that's the direction that we should be going, or we might want to be going because of our core values, depression can occur when we take a different path that removes us from them. I can see a comment has come up. Stressors have a major impact on mood, and building resilience is vital to stand when storms come. Understanding our core values and triggers can aid the recovery journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of many tools, and I think that's really good to reflect on, that when we're talking about these things, it's not going to cure it, but it's going to be another aid that's going to help with that recovery, it's going to help with that moving on. It's something that's going to be used as a part of the puzzle of moving forward, and I think that is a really good reflection. Thank you for the person on Facebook that commented that.
That's true. So that's a very, very big piece of the puzzle potentially.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Should we go on to our next question?
I think so.
So there was a bit of a confusion in the comments around where our comments are coming from. So we've been collecting comments on our Facebook, on our Instagram, on our YouTube channel, all throughout the week. So please feel free to comment any questions in the chat. Now we do see them. We can't answer all of them, but this is we're pulling them from questions that we've been asked over the week. So that's why they're a graphic on the screen. And the next question is, I've tried so many different medications. Why don't they work for me? Now, this is one that I did a lot of work around when I was in my own journey. To a little bit of background, I was under mental health services for over a decade. I had been tales of different things, and I never used to value the importance of not just taking I never used to recognise that actually medication was one of many things that I had to do in order to work on my mood, work on my well-being. It was almost as if because I felt that I couldn't do it, I expected medication to be the cure. I expected medication to be the thing that took me and just made me better. And it's a hard lesson to say, you know, actually I've still got to put work in. Not because you're not valid because the antidepressants isn't working, but because the more work you do on yourself, the more your body is primed to actually productively use that medication. And medication might be something that you need to have, and that's okay. I personally didn't in the end, because I got to a point where I felt that I could come off of medication and manage without it. But for people who do, addressing your core needs and addressing other needs and actually and putting those into practice, food, eating well, sleeping well, exercising regularly, as much as these are flippant things that you would have been told time and time again about depression, they are extremely important, not because they will cure your depression, but because at very least they will help your medication become more effective. And on the off chance, and this does happen, that your medication might not be what's suitable for you, might not be that works for you, it's really important to discuss that with your doctor and say, look, this isn't working for me. Because there is a lot of different brands of medication, there's a lot of different dosages of medication, there's a lot of different options in terms of what medication works well with what treatment. So it's really important that if you do have an issue with your medication, really reach out to the people who prescribed it you, have a discussion about where you want to go and actually what you need to address, what core needs might not be being met, and have that really honest, non-judgmental thing with yourself, really non-judgmental conversation, and just say, okay, this needs to be sorted before I can work on, you know, to make my medication better for me or to help aid my well-being.
Absolutely. I think you've touched on so many great points there again, Jazz. And medication can prove to be a really useful support for some people. I know for myself, I was on citalopram for a good few years as well, and it's something that in that moment really helped. It did help me for a good long while. But this is the thing, if we're talking about that whole puzzle again, of how it is that we can start to understand and better manage our mental well-being, for some people it could prove to not work. For some people, it could prove to be a support that is useful for a while until we discover other ways of managing ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of friends as well, one in particular that I'm thinking of, who he started to take venlafaxine. He had a lot of low mood for a long time, and that was it. That was genuinely all that he needed. And hats off to him, brilliant. But this is the thing, I love that you touched on it. Medication can prove to be a small piece of the puzzle, but it is also potentially a passive way that we can start to manage. And you alluded to it as well, and I know I was in this headspace as well. When I was really struggling, I was hoping that there was going to be a magic tablet. I was hoping there was going to be a magic wand, or that someday somebody might say a sentence to me, and that would somehow transform my life, just in that singular moment. But it's often a lot more complex than that. And although it can be a very good passive way of managing, a much bigger part of the picture, I would consider, is going to be about actively managing depression. And that's a scary concept.
But it is, once you get started, it becomes easier, it becomes more habitual, doesn't it, when you start working on the areas that we need to work on. And there was a really good question that I've just seen. Can you forgive yourself, from it on Facebook, can you forgive yourself for being depressed while you're in that state? Or can that only take place once you move out of it? And I think this is what I'm going to lead into, in the fact that forgiveness comes by accepting that that at that time, or at this time in your life, you know, it's okay, you're okay to feel this way. It's how we're using that kind of emotion we're putting into ourselves. If we're saying to ourselves, I forgive myself for feeling this way, I accept that I feel this way right now, but I can work on myself, that gives us a much more positive and productive way of getting out of it, getting through it, moving from it. If we're shaming ourselves into into being unwell, if we're shaming ourselves for being depressed, we're more likely to stay in that place because we've shamed ourselves. So there is an element, I think it's different for everybody. Some people will be able to recognise and start to forgive themselves and start to accept that they need that time. Some people will recognise when they've moved away from it, and then when they go back to that place, if they do go back to that place, they will recognise they're allowed to forgive themselves. But the way I did it was just to keep telling myself, I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing the best I can. I'm capable. I'm going to get myself through this. I just need some time, and I just need some support.
Absolutely.
Or I just need whatever I need. I just need medication, it might be. It's whatever's personal for you.
Whatever works for you in the moment. That is such a good question, and I don't want to be so prescriptive. I don't want to be so black and white with this as well. But in my experience, and this is all that I have to offer, is my own experience.
Absolutely.
Reaching a state of forgiveness is synonymous with acceptance. They, to me, are very much the same thing. And generally, if we need to reach a place of acceptance, it is quite closely linked to there having been a dramatic change in our life. In fact, acceptance is also seen as the last stage in the loss and grief process as well. And a big part of that loss and grief process is that potentially for an amount of time, we might sit in a place of, they call it depression, but it's more complicated than that. It's a mixture of feelings. It could be anger, guilt, resentment, shame. And it is by processing those emotions and extending that self-compassion that we can reach a place of forgiveness, which would aid us in getting out of depression, potentially.
Thank you very much for bringing that in. We'll move on. We've got a next question. I've just read that somebody on our YouTube says, I'm in hospital now, not COVID, but here is so boring. I hope you feel well soon. I hope you're getting yourself feeling well. And someone else on YouTube says, found a nice and calming channel. That's really good that we have you here. Thank you very much. I did see the next question pop up. Sorry about that, question person. Why is having high expectations of yourself a bad thing? It makes me try harder.
So this is a really interesting link as well. We've already kind of talked about the psychological aspect that can link with depression, and expectations absolutely starts to form one of the centerpieces of that as well. So when it comes to expectations, this is the way that I like to think of it. Having high expectations can be damaging for yourself potentially. If you're here and you're trying to set the bar up here again, and it's too far out of reach, you might potentially be setting yourself up for that feeling of failure, should you not be able to get to where it is that you want to be. It is something that I recognise for myself. I consider myself to be a perfectionist, and most people that work with me will see that quite often, unfortunately, as well. And it means that I lead to a propensity to chastise, bully, criticise myself as well, off the back of not reaching those expectations. High expectations, this is the way that I've left it in my own mind. Bad for the individual, really good for the people around them.
Yeah. I think with high expectations, I always like to break it into two. I think having expectations of yourself and saying you can achieve things is really good. It makes you try harder, it makes you motivate yourself. But it's about if those expectations are achievable for me. So if if they're my expectations, if they're coming from what I want to do for myself, one of the most important piece of work I did in myself was actually to take all my goals in life and say to all these high expectations I set on myself about things like marriage, children, things like, these kind of expectations. I said, is this something I want, or is this something that I just expect I will have because it's quote unquote normal? That was one of the things with high expectations. I was never going to conform to, getting married to a man, which was the one thing that I always had an expectation on myself. And I would put myself to a low place because I knew that was never going to be an expectation. But I, at the time when I was younger especially, thought that I had to do that in order to be normal. And when I left that behind and accepted, actually, I can love who I want to. I can get a job I want to get. I always believed I had to be a certain set of predetermined, the grandparents are proud of me jobs. So like a teacher, a nurse, and things like this. And I still want to go into those. I want to go into a profession in healthcare, but I was able to find one that was at my core values. It was something that linked to what I wanted to do. My expectations now are firstly achievable to my current situation. I haven't got an expectation in a year that I'll have a Ferrari, mainly because I don't really need a Ferrari, and nor can I drive. Maybe one day. And also, I set ones that are achievable for my situation, but also are in line with what I want, and what's going to make me happy, and what's going to really make me make my heart sing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things that you've really hit on there as well. If I want to swim the channel, I'm not going to start by swimming the Solent tomorrow.
No.
Dangerous, inappropriate, and I can guarantee you at this stage in time as well, I would fail at that. But also the expectations that we have that are passed on to us by society. Next year we've got a comment from Facebook that says, "Man, I relate to the view of wanting to marry a man. I need to realise it was society." Expectations that can be passed on to us. But it doesn't just stem from society. Again, it also potentially stems from the influence and role models that we were touching on earlier that we've had throughout our developmental stage as well. And just to share my experience, a huge reason I would say for me tumbling into low mood and depression was that I'd had imprinted on me from a young age that in order for me to be successful, I needed to get to a really high standard academically. I needed to have a lot of money in my bank account. I had to be incredibly physically fit, and I had to be working in London doing some sort of financial job.
Yeah.
This actually didn't tie in with who it is that I was at all. And it was an expectation I held for myself for years and years and years. Eventually I went to university. I discovered that I didn't enjoy studying maths. And then suddenly this vision of where it is that I'd always been trying to get to seemed unreachable. And consequently, disconnection, feelings of shame started to creep in. And then that was really, I think, my starting point for tumbling downwards, effectively. Because I had high expectations, but those high expectations weren't true to me.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas that I definitely agree with that, and when you recognise that this time you're going for a goal that actually you don't want, or the steps to it aren't conforming to what you like or what you enjoy or what you think you can kind of do long term, for example. A career is a massive one. I find, I'm not sure if you relate to this, but when you go down that spiral of recognising it, you almost become kind of, this is going to sound, but you're almost kind of covered in sellotape. You're catching everything as you go back down. You're catching all of the negative comments other people might have said that might not even be personal to you, but you might personalise it, or you just catch the feed. You purposely will block out any kind of positive things, and your brain will just actively search for that reason to kind of, I guess, evidence the negative feelings you're having about yourself. That's definitely what happened in my case. I'm not sure if you relate to that.
Absolutely.
But depression has a way of, we talk about the inner critic, and how the inner critic really heavily links. There's a really amazing TED talk we talk about in our foundation course at Isopia about the inner critic. So I would definitely encourage you to watch that, about how our inner critic can really affect ourselves and our well-being. It's all built around the expectations we put on ourselves, the expectation society might put on ourselves, or the kind of feedback we've been accepting into ourselves. If we're not used to accepting positive feedback, or we don't believe the value of accepting positive feedback, we're less likely to then think positively and work positively in ourselves. But that is a really good question, and I think high expectations, there's definitely pros and cons, but as if that high expectation is productive and positive, and as you said at the start, as you alluded to, the situation in which that expectation is placed on you.
That's something, the negative thinking, the psychological aspects will naturally come in as a consequence of us feeling like then we might be broken or defective because we haven't managed to get where it is that we want to go.
Absolutely.
Shame-based beliefs come in, negative self-talk, inner demons, and thus we can start to tumble into the cycle of depression as well.
Absolutely. Should we go on to the next question?
I think I could talk about that last one
We
for so long.
definitely can, can't we?
So, how do you get off the cycle of depression? I've tried to stay off it, but I can't stay off it and be happy. Okay. So, the cycle...
So are we aware of the cycle of depression? I think we've got an infographic. I think that would be something to bring up quite quickly about the cycle of depression.
Very good. So if we can take away the caption with the question as well. Lovely, so we can see it in full. This is the cycle of depression that perhaps people might have heard of before, and you might recognise this in yourself as well if you feel that you're suffering with it. So what the cycle of depression describes is that initially there might be a feeling of sadness, a natural feeling of sadness that might come from outside stimuli, a missed opportunity, a sudden loss or change as well that can happen in our lives. And from that sadness, if it gets to a point where it's overtaking, we can start to lose interest and motivation in doing things as well. I think that's for me when I was spending a lot of time horizontal. As a consequence of loss of interest and motivation, we find that we're not doing as much as we'd like to. We stay inactive, our comfort zone shrinks as well, which was a comment that I saw earlier, I do believe. And from that, we can start to have a loss of energy, a physical kind of start of change starts to happen. And for me, this is why people often describe depression as exhaustive, feeling tired all of the time, because of the cycle we can find ourselves in. From that, as we disconnect from the things that we'd like to be doing or the expectations that we want to hold ourselves to, feelings of guilt, shame, worthlessness start to creep in. And what has that done? That's just compounded the initial issue already.
Yeah.
And that is just going to propagate and increase those feelings of sadness further down the line. And therefore, we can find ourselves going around this specific cycle here for days, weeks, months, years, decades. There really is no time frame on this. So it is, quite likely perhaps that if you feel that you identify with depression, this is something you might see happening for yourself. So the question was effectively, what is it that we can do to stay out of the cycle of depression?
Yeah.
And what we will notice here is that this is a catch-22 almost, a self-propagating downward spiral. But there are plenty of things that we can start to do actively to take ourselves out of that cycle of depression. And the bottom line is, unfortunately, they all require action. That is the thing. So,
and action, I think, is something that we can do to meet our own needs. And I think really action, obviously, it depends on what we need to act on. It depends on what area we need to work on. And it's also about having really important conversations with ourselves and saying, is this something I can act on or need to act on? Or is this something that might be involving another person, might be out of my control? What can I do to kind of act that's going to be in my best interests? Not in the best interest of necessarily another, it's in my best interests.
Absolutely. I think something that's important to recognise is that although we're all going to have unique experiences, which perhaps have driven us down to this place of low mood, there are some universally accessible things that all of us will be able to do and start to incorporate. They have to be the ones that match you, absolutely, that we can start to do to take ourselves out of the cycle of depression. And this is where we can refer back to the Bio Psychosocial Model just very briefly and start to better understand some of the things that we can do. If we feel that in part the reason for our low mood is biological, it is to do with our physiology, our neurotransmitters and brain chemistry or physical health, then we can start to have a look at medication. Number one, medication is specifically designed to make some of those biological changes. We've talked about it, so I won't go any further. It does work for some, but a bigger part is active. And there is a chap called Dr. Stephen Alardi who has made a proposition that there are 6 steps that anybody can universally start to work on, which can prove to be more effective than medication in terms of managing biological depression. It's going to be intuitive, and you probably don't want to hear this information, but it's the big ones: sleep, food, exercise, and specific specifically we'll be talking about those on the 5th of April. There's no social connection comes into it, a sense of community, engaged activity. So often when we're feeling low, it is because our mind is almost teleported or time travelled to a different place. Are we focusing on the future and losing hope? Are we reminiscing on the past and getting caught up in that as well? And he also proposes sunlight as well. And if anyone feels that their mood dips when it's poor weather or gets to winter time, potentially that's a biological reason why. Another couple of things I'll touch on just very quickly. With psychological depression, it is about addressing the way that we think. So that is about adopting an open and positive mindset, recognizing when our thinking and beliefs might be driving us towards these places of low mood, and creating a space in which we can start to question the validity of those thoughts that we're having. And gently what we can start to do is change our focus, our frame of reference, to something that is wholly negative, to something that is slightly more accurate, thankfully, and positive as well.
And also there's the thing with psychological about comparison. Recognizing that you're going to be in your own journey and you're going to have your own things, and actually saying, I'm not going to compare my journey to anybody else, this is going to be my journey. That's so important when addressing any kind of mental health need, by saying, you know, this is my personal journey and I'm going to have to go it my own way and find my own journey and find the things that work for me, back away from the things that I'm struggling with or are adding to this issue at the moment, and being clear with yourself that that's okay, and allowing yourself to do that, and allowing yourself to take that time for you.
So there are so many different components that come in, and often kind of what we might need to do might seem really complicated, but it is true that by coming to a service like a Seropia, for instance, or another support service, you can start to have a little bit of clarity about what that means for you.
Absolutely.
What is that framework that we might need to start to apply to ourselves to get ourselves out of the cycle of depression?
There's a really interesting question here. I like to have a challenge. It says, don't we tend to be extra hard on ourselves because of how society conforms us? And there was I think this might have been a reply to this, but I'm not sure. But I'm going to read it because it is quite relevant. Society is a rainbow of individuals. You've just got to find our people to make our own societies with, and I think that is prime. When one of the things that in my past was to do with my sexuality, and when I recognised that actually I can be myself and I can be proud of myself, and that's okay, what I would do was I made my own society with the greatest one in the world. I still had to conform to things like the law, obviously. I couldn't just say, oh, my society doesn't have this law, that's fine. I conform to things like law, to things like some forms of social convention, but I made my own society. I surrounded myself with people who loved me for me, who weren't conformative because they had to fit in, but conformative because they wanted to connect. It's having that healthy way of, saying I will conform to the beliefs of my friends, my family, the people who are important to me, and if it's not hurting anybody, it's not negatively affecting somebody's life, for example, I'm okay to do that. I'm okay to conform to me. I'm okay to have my beliefs. I'm okay to have my, love who I want to love or be who I want to be. And I think I definitely wanted to take that one before we
wrap up. Absolutely. Connection, community can prove to be a huge, huge thing as well. That can potentially help us to find that meaning as well. Back to those core values again, that can really start to help. All right, I can see we're coming up to a minute to go, so I think perhaps it's time for us to do a little bit of an outro, guys.
I think that might be the best, but I want to say thank you very much for attending today from my perspective, and thank you for getting involved with the content. In terms of what we offer, we have a lot of content, so much content on our Facebook page and on our website around low mood, depression and other mental health topics. And I know you probably have a prepared outro, so I'm going to let you go for this, but thank you for everyone to coming in and getting involved today, and this is a really enjoyable experience to come on and have this time with everybody.
It's nice to have these authentic discussions.
Absolutely.
I would say it's really all I wanted to say was to mirror what you said. Thank you very much for coming along today. hopefully today has given you a little bit more insight and opportunity to reflect on some of these really, really important aspects of depression. If you've identified with anything today and you're not a member of our service, just let you know, as long as you're residing on the Isle of Wight, go to your GP, ask for a referral, and you'll have the opportunity to have these really great discussions with us in person not too shortly as well. So do not lose hope. Please feel free to join us. And otherwise, our next live is going to be taking place on the 9th of April. That's going to be in this kind of format. And we're going to be talking about one aspect of the Bio Psychosocial Model, that's sleep, food and exercise. It is a huge topic as well. So if there's anything that you want to glean from that, any questions that you might have, just make sure to join us then.
But I hope you all have a brilliant weekend and hope to see you on the 9th.
Absolutely.
Take very good care,
guys.
everybody. Bye.
See you later.
Bye, everybody.